Welcome to the ArmorerStore.com series on armoring. This video segment we will be tackling probably the most daunting task of any armorer. It's called rewiring. There's nothing magic to this. It just takes a bit of finesse and a lot of practice. What we'll be doing today is we're going to be rewiring an old epee blade. We'll be changing it from a French grip length, which is normally how these blades come when they're bare, to a pistol grip length. As I said, this seems to be a pretty daunting task to most armorers. But there is one key thing that this particular task requires, and that is that the groove of the blade be very, very clean. Now, there's a number of ways of removing the old wire that is in there and prepping the blade. One way is to soak the blade in acetone. Most armorers will take a piece of galvanized pipe or copper pipe, put a cap on the end and a cover on the top, fill it with acetone, and soak the blade in the acetone either overnight or for a period of about an hour or two. When you do that, you can take the old wire and remove it completely, and then you have less of a cleanup job. Another way to do it is to take a hot air gun and heat the blade and the wire and pull it out slowly as the glue melts and disintegrates. What I've discovered that recently is that most wires, after a while, you can just pull straight out. In order to prep the blade, you're going to need a couple of things. First of all, you're going to need a Dremel. Now, this particular Dremel for epees has a number 420 cutting wheel. For foil, you use a 409. The 409 will sit down inside that groove very nicely. The other thing that is important to have are a pair of safety goggles. Finally, if you're going to do this with a blade that has not been soaked and you're grinding the wire out directly, you need to be in a very, very well ventilated area. The reason being is that most of these wires are glued in with super glue. Super glue is a cyanoacrylate. The operative part of that word is cyano. Yes, when you heat up this glue when you're cutting it, it does produce a fair amount of cyanide gas, which is why you want to be in a well ventilated area when you do this. Normally when I do this sitting down, and what I will do is rest the tool on my leg, bring it up to speed, and move the blade relative to the tool, not the tool to the blade. If you do that, you get loose of it. This is rotating at about 10,000 RPM. It will cut and it will run. So, as you're cleaning this, as you can see, there's still a fair amount of smoke, even from this old blade. Most of that is rust. There. I now have a nice, smooth groove that's clean the length of the blade. The last thing I want to do is I want to run this up, and then I want to put a small chamfer on the ends of the threaded end for the barrel. The reason I do that is so that when I pull the wire through the barrel, it won't catch and cut. So, and put a small bevel there. Good. Now we have a nice clean blade that's ready to glue. Next, we put the blade in the vise, point up, and we prepare our wire. The red wires are what's called French wires, blue are German. And again, you can use these. You need to make sure that you have the correct barrel when you're doing this because this size of the cap is not uniform. So you have to be careful about how you do that. What I do is I untwist everything and then I put them in my fingers and I work them slowly out to untwist them. Now again, these techniques that I'm showing you for epee also work for foil. It's a little less complicated because you only have one wire to work with, not two. So once you get this all straightened out and you make sure you get all the kinks out of the wire, what I do is I put the wire between my thumb and my forefinger and I pull through and I straighten out the wires to make sure they're running parallel to each other. Now, is it absolutely necessary that the wires be parallel to each other as you glue them in? No, it just makes it easier. So as you work that down and get those all running parallel with each other, you're ready to start. We take our barrel and we thread the wires through the end of the barrel, making sure that you feed from the tip end and not the threaded end first. Now, I normally only pull through about an inch of wire. That way, when I put it onto the blade and I start to screw the barrel back onto the tip of the blade, I make sure that if I get it caught or there's things, I just lose a little bit of wire. I don't end up losing the entire wire. So once that's threaded on, I take a 6mm wrench, 5mm if you're using foil, and I tighten the barrel onto the blade. Now be very careful when you're doing this for both foil and for epee, because it is possible to over tighten the barrel, and if you hear a very loud ting, that means you've just split the barrel and you have to start over again. If you've seen my segments on foil and epee, you will know that current flows through the barrel and is an integral part of the electrical circuit of each weapon. So, get this tightened on. Now, sometimes armorers will use Loctite or thread lock or something like that to make sure that the barrels stay on tight. I have never really seen an issue or have to do that, so as a result I don't use that. However, if you're going to use that, you want to make sure that you use either Loctite blue or Loctite purple for that. Loctite red is what we use in the aerospace business to make sure that nuts and bolts don't come loose during launch or any other event. So we feed the wire through the barrel, setting the little plastic cup in the end of the barrel. Next, we take what is called a tip setting tool. This has recessed end on either one that fits over the contacts for epee or over the little brass hat for foil. And we take that and we use that to make sure that that is seated into the bottom of the cup. Now, in days past, people have taken small hammers and tapped them in. There's no need to do that. They now fit, and there's enough control in the manufacturing of these that they'll slip in fairly well. So, get that seated. Once the cap is seated, again, between your thumb and your forefinger, we run the wire down the blade. This is the second critical piece about rewiring. Pull the wires taut and place your thumb over the wire. Make sure you do it on an unthreaded portion of the blade and also where it is not square, that it's on the round portion. Take the wire and wrap it back around itself tightly. What that does is that holds the wire for the next step when you start gluing. Then take a piece of tape, duct tape, gaff tape, and going in the direction that you just wrapped the wire, wrap the tape around the wire. That now holds everything in place for the next critical step, the gluing. In order to glue, one of the things that you will need is called a bending chain. It is a length of chain with 2 copper caps, or plastic caps, or whatever you wish, that are attached to the end of it. One end has a small open hook on the other end. You place one end over the end of the tang, and then you take the other end and put it over the barrel. You should get a nice bend in it. Now you want to take this little extra piece and bring it down and hook it onto the chain so that you have a bend that's approximately 6 to 8 inches on the blade. Now you're ready for gluing. Gluing is critical, especially if you have glue. In this case, we have some glue, a fresh bottle. This is Gorilla Glue. For epées, I use the thicker gel type, or I use, for foil, the less viscous thin type, as it will run up the blade and wick and do a nice job of gluing it. So, we start at the barrel end, placing the tip of the glue away from the tip, because what you don't want to do is glue that little plastic piece inside the barrel. And then with a small bead, we start running the glue down the blade. Now, with a thinner viscosity glue, I'll stop about here and let it set. And then I'll start from the other end. With a thicker gel, you can go ahead and glue from this end and run it all the way pretty much down to the other end of the blade. I stop about 4 to 5 inches from it. Let it set for a while. And then, keeping the barrel up and starting at the shoulder of the blade, I now glue back down to where I stopped before. Take your tip, kind of smooth things out a little bit so you don't get any bubbles in there. And then you take your blade and you let it dry. Normally I will let this dry about a half an hour so I get a good solid set on the glue. Okay, now that we've had a chance for the glue to dry on our blade, we're ready to do the next step. Take this apart. Now we put it back into the vise, and we're going to do a couple of things. First of all, we're going to trim this blade to fit this pistol grip. As it stands right now, it's set up as a French grip, but we're going to change it down to a pistol. What you're going to need for that: some heavy artillery, some bolt cutters, a die, which is 6 millimeter by 1. And then to put in the cant, we're going to need a tool called a tang bending tool. We'll remove the tape that we put on previously to hold the wire in place. If we can get a hold of it. Or we'll just cut it off. Make sure that when you do that you do it very carefully and you don't cut the wires that you so very carefully put in. Remove your tape. And when we go to bend this tang, it'll be evident as to why this is an important step. Now that we have the tape finally removed and we unwrap our wire, the next thing we want to do is install the spaghetti covering or the spaghetti wire over top of this. The spaghetti wire prevents any cross contamination between the wires or cross-circuiting. And normally, sometimes you'll use used wire which is curved. That's when an ordinary soda straw comes in very, very handy. Trim the ends of the wire so that you don't have any insulation that is sticking out or can catch on the spaghetti cord. So a nice clean cut. Take your spaghetti wire, feed it into the straw. And leave about an inch and a half out the other end. And then start threading the spaghetti insulation over the end of the wire. Now, the reason for the straw is to keep that spaghetti straight, because the wire is not going to curve very much, and you slowly just feed the spaghetti onto the wire. It may take a little bit. Now, one of the things that you want to do is, if you twist the spaghetti one way or the other, it will cause the cotton wrapping around the wire to either bunch up, or if you turn it around the other way, it will wrap it on there and make it easier to get on. Now, as you slowly but surely feed it on, twisting it as you go. And eventually it will make its appearance out the other end of the wire, which then you'll be able to just pull it and seat it against the shoulder area of the blade. Yeah, almost there. Just a little bit more. There we go. Comes out the other end. Grab a hold of it and you can slide it down. Let's do the other one real quick. This time I'll forego using the straw because this went on pretty easily. But if you have a piece of spaghetti that's fairly kinked up and you've been this is a great way to do that. So again, we thread this on, we twist it, thread it on, pull it on as you go, and it should go fairly smoothly. If for some reason you don't have some spaghetti tubing, as it's called, you can take a piece of hookup wire, 24 gauge or 26 gauge hookup wire, and pull the insulation off of that wire, and it works just as well. So you don't have to spend a whole lot of money buying a long strand of spaghetti wire to do that. Okay, it's just about through, not quite all the way. There we go. Come on. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Okay. So, one of the things that might happen with these things is the end gets a little bit closed, either tripped or whatever, but you can grab a hold of it. Here we go, and there. All right, good. So we now have our spaghetti wire over the wires. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to trim this length to fit this grip. The issue now becomes, what kind of pommel nut are you using? If you use an outside hex, then the length of the tang is not that critical. With the inside hex and the slotted hex pommel nuts, it becomes critical, because if you make them too long, as you screw them on, they will back the tool out and you won't be able to tighten down the grip. For this instance, I'm going to go ahead and use the outside hex. And what I will do is that I will put put the grip next to the tang, and I will approximate about maybe a quarter or so inside the grip as to where I want to cut this off. And I will mark that with the magic marker. Now, sometimes these blades get rusty and you can't see that mark, so then what I will do is I will take a piece of tape, in this case 1-inch painter's tape, and I will put it around the blade about where I want it. Next, take my bolt cutters and open them up, and a mass cord. I'll take one end of the mass cord and put it above the cut, and I'll put the other one below the cut. The reason why I do this, again, is safety. Once I cut this off, if I'm standing in a crowded area, I don't want this piece of metal flying around and hitting somebody. So, I find out where I want to cut it, I put it here, and cut it, and the mass cord captures our broken piece, and it doesn't go anywhere. Once we do that, we remove our tape, and then we take our die, again 6mm by 1. We feed it over top of the tang, and we get it started. And what you're doing here is you're recutting the thread from where you just made the cut. And that will help the pommel nut to go on more smoothly. Run that down a bit. Clean out the cut. Notice that I'm taking and I'm backing it off about 1/4 inch. Not so critical when you're rethreading a tang like this, but if you're cutting new threads, what happens is as it cuts the metal, it forms a small curl. And when you back the die up, it will break that off and help it cut more smoothly. Back that off. Take your pommel nut and start it just to make sure that you got a good clean thread, and it gets started. Excellent. Good. The next thing we want to do is we want to set the cant of the blade. The cant are the two angles that define the offset of the blade from your hand. Normally, if you held your hand straight this way, your target is in front, is this direction. So you want the blade to be naturally pointed in towards your target. The way to do that is to take the tang and bend it either to the right or to the left, depending upon what hand you are. If you're right-handed, you want it to the left. If you're left-handed, you want it to the right. And then you also bend it down in order to make sure that as you're, rather than have your tipping straight up, it's down towards your opponent. To do that, I have a tool that I've designed and I make, tang bending tool, and it has a square hole on one side and a round hole on the other side. The square hole fits down over the square portion of the blade. Now that's important because that square area right here contacts the lower portion of the blade so that when you bend it, it bends in one place. It doesn't cause a curve in the blade. That's why this hole is slightly larger than 6mm. So it holds the blade straight as you bend it. So what we'll do is we'll take this blade and we'll bend it down slightly. Okay? And now I'll move this in a little bit because I'm going to make this a right-handed blade. If I move it in and set it next to the center of the vise, when I go to pull it this way, then it doesn't want to twist in the vise. So we'll take that and then we'll bend it slightly this way. What results is a bend that is down and to the side that we want. Now that your blade is rewired, you can go ahead and assemble it. And if you want to know how to do that with foil or epee, please download the 2 sessions versus on foil and on epee, and that will show you how to assemble this. In order to store it, take your wires, wrap them loosely this time around the tang. Take a piece of tape, again going in the direction that you wound them. Tape it, and now you have a functional rewired blade that you can use in case you break another one. Thank you. Please visit my website, thearmorerstore.com, and have a great day.